There are four types of control what we have seen. One is people related control. People related control. Another control is organizational related control. Organizational level control. Third one is your physical security related control. And the fourth one is your IT related control. So basically, cyber security is focusing upon this IT related controls only. Some part of physical also has been covered in the cyber security. But people or organizational are important when we are dealing with information security or when we are dealing with the privacy related controls. So then these two comes in a picture. Otherwise, for the IT security, we can cover physical and IT related. IT related control, sometime it is also called ITGC control, IT general controls. ITGC controls are there. Sometimes we call it as IT controls also. Now, before going ahead, we need to discuss what would be the ideal IT infrastructure within the organization to fight against those risks. So when we are saying what would the ideal architecture, so suppose something is coming from outside, then first level of defense would be our firewall. Firewall is the first level of defense. We need to install firewall. Once then firewall, then we need to install where IPS or IDS system. IPS is intrusion prevention system and IDS is intrusion detection system. So this is the firewall. After that, IPS and IDS would be installed. Then after that, we need to install routers or switches. Our routers or switches would be there. So basically, switches would be there. We need to install switches. Through switches, we will prepare various VLAN. We will segregate the network. So firewall would be there, IPS, IDS system, and switches would be there. And after this switches, all our system would be connected. Like we do have different department, their system would be connected in this. Now, all our endpoint devices would be connected, switches and server. So this would be an ideal security diagram. And this is called as, because firewall is first line of defense. It used to block the scanning. We have seen yesterday that Nmap is used to scan the open port. If we'll block the scan from the firewall itself, no one is able to scan our network. We can segregate the network. We can have proper ports blocking and all the websites also which we don't want to user to see. So all those things we can do with the help of firewall. IPS and IDS system are used to detect the intrusions. If someone is trying to penetrate in our system, so this will detect the intrusions and give us the alerts that someone is trying to penetrate in our system. Switches are used to form the virtual LANs. Virtual LAN is basically this is a virtual, you can say, segregation of the internal network. Our network should be internally segregated. So this is covered under the VLAN program. Then come in endpoint. In endpoint, we'll install the these are the endpoint devices. These endpoint devices would be installed with Active Directory. Active Directory system would be involved to manage the authentication and authorization mechanism. Antivirus is also being installed in the system to fight against the malwares and all. Apart from this, there are various SIM tools would be also installed in the system to and this would be the ideal architecture, what needs to be designed within the organization. Now, question comes here, how we have to design the system. So, because what cyber security says that first you need to identify your risk. Once you have identified risk, then you need to work on the control to implement the control so that this may not happen. Suppose in the risk we have identified that due to the vulnerability, like our port is open, one of the port is open, unnecessary ports are open, and by using this open port, hacker will try to penetrate in our system and they will get the access in our system, try to steal the data, try to erase the data, try to encrypt the data based upon the their choice. Now, open port is the vulnerability in the system. Now, here we have identified the risk. Now we need to see what kinds of controls we need to have. The first thing control would be that key, someone will not able to scan our system. Scanning block would be there. When scanning would be blocked, so no one is able to penetrate in our. We are not able to see what are the ports are open. Another thing is to find out whatever the ports are open. So for that we need to have a vulnerability scanning mechanism. We need to identify our vulnerability on a regular interval of time. And third would be that you block those unnecessary ports, blocking of port. So these three would be there. Now questions come, what does this standard say? Because you are the person who is responsible for identification of the risk, and you know these are the controls should be implemented so that this may not occur again. But what happens when you left the job? For that purpose, to become a process driven approach, the first thing is that we, when we identify the risk, before implementing a control, we need to form a policy or process. A policy or process or SOP, you can say standard operating procedure, we need to form. Those policy and process will talk about your controls, that what are the controls we need to implement it. Those policy and process will talk about the controls. So this is the overall idea why we are going for the controls, because we will start it from the risk, then we will go to the controls. Now we'll start from the people related control. Just let me put my charger in. No. So what I'm saying, we'll start from the people related control. There are 4 types of controls are there. So we'll start from the people. Now we need to see why we are starting from the people itself. What is the risk to the people? Because we are discussing these controls based upon the identification of the risk. Okay. Now, once during the risk assessment, what you have identified that the persons which I am hiring is not, you can say their behavior is not good. They are suspicious in nature. Sometime I may hire a hacker, or sometime insider trading they can do within our organization, or they can steal the data and all based upon their prior experience. Okay. Now once you have identified the risk of these things, now you need to think about the controls. You need to as per the risk assessment what we are doing, we need to identify the risk, we need to assess the risk, like how critical the risks are. If I don't have any data, all the data is in the public domain, then there is nothing risk in my organization. If all the data which company owns are in the public domain, then I don't have any risk. Then I don't need any control also. Okay. Now, when we do have a certain critical data with us, and those critical data may impact upon the organization when it will go in wrong hands. Those wrong hands are our employee. So we have identified a risk that a person which I have hired may steal our data, may share our data to our competitors and all. The risk we have identified. Now, so a risk is there. Now we need to see whose gap is this, how these things has been identified. So we have done our research work. We have seen that this wrong hiring is done by the HR of the organization because they don't have a practice of screening or background verification. So we have identified the risk. We have seen also there is lack of availability of the process within the organization. Now, when we have seen there is a lack of you can say process of screening or background verifications are in the organization, then what we will do? What will do our first step? You have seen there is a lack of screening or BGB process, background verification check, background verification are missing within your organization. So what you will do? What would be your first step? You need to tell me now. But now you need to understand how we are going to implement the controls.
Yeah. It's trying to understand a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Now what is my question here? You are doing a risk assessment exercise within the organization. You have identified a risk of wrong hiring. Wrong hiring, you have identified that you have hired a person, you may hired a person which background would be of hacker, or his character is not so good in his previous organization. He was caught in stealing the data of the organization. Okay, you have identified a risk of wrong hiring. You have identified. Now you have then you have gone in depth and you have seen this was due to the lack of availability of screening or background verification process. You don't have background verification check process within the organization, or you don't have the proper screening mechanism within the organization. Now what would be your first step?
Restricting his access to the data first.
Right.
Blocking all the data he got, making sure he doesn't have enough access.
Sure. The moment you have identified this, what you have seen, you are temporarily going to block his access and all. So this would be our immediate action what we are going to do. But it may happen in future also. Okay, it may happen in the future also. Then what you need to do, you need to have a proper solution for that. So how this proper solution would come? You are going to frame a policy and process. Okay, when you will frame a policy, you will write in the policy that, boss, whenever any candidate would be hired within the organization, they need to undergo background verification check. Their background verification would be mandatorily done. So this would be your process. Now what HR department will do, your HR department will initiate a background verification check when a person joins. When in the background verification check, something would be discovered as the red flag, then HR department is not going to hire that person. Either it is related to their character, last previous employment, or educational fraud, educational background details. Everything would be checked. If everything would be checked in that, then you are not going to hire that candidate. So this would be our control. We need to have a proper policy and process within the organization. This comes from the risk assessment. When we are discussing earlier about the risk assessment, that time I also said to you, try to identify numbers and numbers of risk. Now these are the risks which we need to identify within the organization, and accordingly we need to put the control. The controls are given in the standard called as ISO 27002. 27002 is the standard where each and every controls are given. I think I have shared these standards with you. If you have got a chance to look on this standard, if you go to the screening process, you'll go to the screening process, you'll see here the background verification checks of all candidates to become personal should be carried out prior to joining of the organization and on an ongoing basis, taking into the consideration applicable laws, regulation, and ethics, and the professional to the business requirement. The classification of the information to be accessed and perceived risk. So this controls we need to put. Guidance has also been given that how you could implement these things. So we need to have a proper screening process within the organization. Verification should take into the consideration of availability of satisfactory references. You need to take business and personal references, verification of completeness and accuracy of the CV, the applicant's CV you will see, and accordingly you will verify the thing. Confirmation of claimed academic and professional qualification, independent identity verification like passport or other documents what has been given by the candidates on that at the time of joining. More detailed verification, you can go for the credit review also. If some of the your employee is going to handle the critical information about the financial matter, then in that case you can go for the credit review also. Criminal background, you can also try to verify the criminal background. Competence to perform the security role, the person if you are hiring for information security position, whether he or she are compatible enough to do their job. This also going to be verified. Can be trusted to take on role, especially if the roles of the critical for the organization. If some roles are the critical for the organization, suppose you are being hired as a chief information security officer, you has been hired as a CISO. In that case, you will be accessing all the critical information of the organization. Then your background verifications to be very stringent. You need to go through a tough background verification process. Where a job, either initial appointment or the promotion, involve a person having access to information processing facility, in particular if the involvement handling confidential information, then also you need to go through these things. So we need to define the procedure in situation where verification cannot be completed on timely manner. If your verification you have not able to do the verification on timely manner, then we need to mitigate the control and we need to implement the things like you will delay the onboarding, delayed deployment of corporate assets, onboarding with reduced access you can give, or you can also terminate the employment. So you can see based upon the identified risk, we can implement these controls within the organization. These kinds of control will help us, or we can say we will form a process of background verification check within the organization, and we will implement these controls within the organization, whether we can, if we are you can say capable enough to perform the background verification, then we will do, otherwise we will hire a third party agency. We will outsource this job to them. Now here a questions comes, if you are sharing of, because you are collecting the personal data of employee, okay, you are collecting the PII information of employee, because when you are going to do background verification check, all the personal information of employee you are going to collect. So when you are going to collect the personal information of an employee, then there is a very, you can say, legal requirements as per the jurisdictions are there. So you cannot share anyone's personal information with a third party. In that case, what we need to do, we need to collect a consent form, CONS, consent. We need to collect a consent from the employee. That is called as a background verification consent you need to collect from the employee. In the consent form, you will write the thing that for which purpose I am collecting this information, what I will do with this information, to whom your information, your PII related information would be shared, and how they can withdraw their consent. So all those things will come under the consent mechanism. So why this consent is very important while performing a background verification check? Because we are collecting the personally identifiable information, PII information we are collecting. That's why it's mandatory to take the consent from the employee. Before taking the consent, you cannot proceed. Because this would be going to fail in the privacy related control if you are not taking consent also. So this is the first thing in the HR side thing. Now another thing what would be there, another thing in the people related control is the terms and condition of employment. Because why this terms and condition of employment is very important, because this is also due to a risk. When you have hired a person and the person has done certain wrong things and you don't have any signed agreement with the employee that what you are going to do when a person will be involved in the security breach, or when I will involve in the sharing the data to another organization without proper knowledge of my current organization, you don't have signed any contract and all the things with the employee, then in that case you are also not bound to do any legal proceedings, or you can say legal filing you cannot able to do against the employee. For that purpose, we need to have a proper terms and condition of employment signed by the employee at the time of joining. What are the things we can include in the terms and condition? It has been given here. We can confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement. We can sign between employee. Legal responsibilities and rights also we can include. Responsibility for the classification of information and the information which organization is giving to the employee. These things also we can include. Code of conduct related information also we can include, like when the employee will involve in such kinds of malpractices, then what are the action we are going to take against him. So there are certain points what we need to include in the contract with employee apart from the financial benefit which we are giving to the employee. So these are the things should also be there. Now you have done the background verification check of the candidate. You have signed that agreement with the employee. Now you have onboarded the employee. Now next action would be that information security awareness, education and training. This is also due to a risk which we have identified. What are the risk here? That when a person joined within the organization, if you have not given a proper training to him, that what are the things he needs to do in terms of information security, what are the do's and don'ts, what he can do, what he is not allowed to do, what are their you can say roles and responsibilities, what would be the wrong thing What would be the in the case when incident would be there within the organization? What is the personally identifiable information? What is information security? What is cyber security? What are the controls are there? What are the things they need to browse? They need to not browse by using the Chrome browser or any browsers. So there are certain do's and don'ts related to information security that needs to be conveyed to the employee. Now, a risk arises when suppose I have joined an organization and I'm not given any training related to that. I'm just doing my work. I'm surfing any websites related to hackings and all, related to the illegal contents, and I am uh, opening anything. I'm putting my pen drive in my laptop. I try to copy the data and all. So these are the things should be there. And even I don't know because now I'm collecting certain personal information of user. I'm sharing with another department, another organization without anything, without any controls and all. Why these are the things there? I am not a person that I'm not a that kinds of person that I'm going to steal that data. But these are the things happening because I have not given proper education or proper awareness, you can say, or I am not being imparted any training. That's why I'm doing these kinds of activity. So this is a risk identified, lack of awareness and training related to the information security process. Now you have identified a risk here. Now what would be the control? The control would be that we are going to provide an infosec related training or information security or cyber security related training or regular interval of time. I will plan my things accordingly that when employee join the organization, then they should undergo with these kinds of information security, cyber security related trainings, or you can say awareness training would be the better thing. So we should have a proper policy for that. So we can form a policy for that also. A proper policy should be there within the organization that how we are going to give the training to the employee. Now, next thing would be there. You have done the screening. You have the first thing, you have done the screening check of the candidate. Another thing that you have also done a you can say agreement with the employee. Now you have also provided training to employee. Now the employee is of your organization. He will start working with your organization and all. Now another thing is the disciplinary process. After giving the training also, people are not listening. People are going to follow the same practice and all. They're trying to delete the data from the system, trying to steal the data. You can say they are involved in the data breach and all. That or on that risk, a disciplinary process will come. In the disciplinary process, when a person will involve in any kind of data breach, policy violations, what has been formed by the organization, then a disciplinary process may initiated against the employee. In the disciplinary process, we should have a proper formal disciplinary process within the organization. The nature, who, what, when, and how, and the gravity of data breach and the consequences, what has been done by the employee, whether the offense was, you can see here, whether the offense was malicious, that is intentional, or unintentional or accidentally, these kinds of things may happen. Whether or not this is a first or repeated offense, for first or repeated offense are there, we need to also see whether this is the repeated or the first, this is the repeated or the first incident. If the violator, if the policy violators are there, they are not properly trained. If they are not properly trained, then it's our fault, it's not their fault. The training is, that's why training is very important. So we will have a proper disciplinary process within the organization. Now, what would happen when an employee been terminated or employee has changed the organization? because at the time you have been associated with an organization, then you are, you can say, blessed with various infosec related facility. You are accessing the things, you do know user ID and password, you know the nature of business what company is doing. Okay, this is the risk identified. When you left one organization and you join another organization, what is the obligation of your previous organization would be covered in this 6.5, that is called as responsibility after the termination or the change of employment. And even also company is terminating, there are certain uh, you can say responsibility roles and responsibility what you need to adhere. So this risk has been identified. How this risk has been identified? Because if you are a person, suppose I am that person, I've left our organization, I've joined another organization, and with when I joined there another new organization, then in new organization I'm discussing whatever the things, you can say I'm sharing the details of whatever the information facility I'm uh, using, I am whatever the password thing what we are having, or how we are doing performing the process. So all my information I'm sharing with my current organization. This should not be there. You for protecting these risks, we need to have a proper roles responsibility defined. So here also we need to have a proper guidance that what would be going to happen when you are going to change the organization. Some of the organization is having 6 month or 1 year period as a litigation that you may not that the employee may not able to share those data. Or sometime organization is also having that thing, thing in your contract that you may not join to your competitor organization and all. So these types of things we can include in that. Now 6.6, the last one is related to the confidentiality or the non-disclosure agreement. You need to sign a non-disclosure agreement with your employee, that you are not supposed, that employee or not supposed, you're not even employee, your partners, your vendors also needs to be signed this non-disclosure agreement. So you need to have a proper process within the organization for the signing of this NDA. Non-disclosure agreement should be signed. This is the preventive control, you can say, or the protect control. In the preventive control, this will protect you from the, you can say, this will protect you from a condition where employee or your vendor or someone is trying to share the data. If they have signed an NDA, they are not going to share anything in anything. So it will comes under the preventive. In the cyber security term, it is a protect, it will comes under the protect thing, and it is applicable to human resource security, the supplier relationships, and also information protection. It is available on these three things. So we need to have a proper NDA signed with the employee or with your vendors or with our partners. So these are the points what we need to cover in the, you can say, HR related control, or you can say people related control. One more control is there, is related to the work from home, or those person who is working from their home, or the persons who are working remotely. So one control is also there that needs to be implemented, implemented within the organization, that what are the controls you need to have when a person is working remotely. That technical controls, that basically this is a part of technique, a half part is technical, or IT related control, and half part would becomes under the people department or HR related controls. Okay. For that purpose, we need to have a proper remote working policy that who are being allowed to work remotely, or when a person working remotely, then what are the places he is allowed to work. Sometimes the person used to work on the airport, in the cafe, eh, or in the public places, but this should not be allowed. This should not be encouraged, because this could uh, result in a data breach. Some things is also called as shoulder surfing. People will come to you, try to see what are you doing in your system and all, try to steal the data and try to move away. So to avoid this, we need to discourage the people who is working on public areas. It is most common thing, like people is catching at the time of catching their flight, people are trying to open their laptop and all, try to work on in the public place by connecting the public Wi-Fi and all. So this should be discouraged. So these are the controls also we need to implement uh, in the organization. So this overall controls, these are the controls comes under the category of your people related control. The people related controls, or you can say these are the control which we are using, these controls when a risk related to people would be there. When a risk related to people would be there, then we need to use these kinds of controls within the organization. So that's all from the people related control. Next control we will discuss the organizational related control, that what are the controls should be applicable as part of organizational things. So that's all for the day. Thank you.